Hey everyone, this video is the first I'm planning to do in a series to cover the Zabble stack, which is the Xano and the Bubble stack of no-code tools for no-code app development. And if you watched the previous video, I'll put a link in the description where I was talking about Bubble's pricing changes. This is the implementation of that effectively, whereby we can dispense with Bubble's backend, its database, and its API workflows, all of those things which come under the new workflow pricing, the workflow unit pricing, which is number one, expensive, and number two, unpredictable. So therefore we're moving our back-end processes to an alternative service, and that is Xano. So the first thing we need to do in terms of getting familiar with this concept is getting absolutely crystal clear where the dividing line is. Which is Bubble, which is Xano. Now, it's very easy to just say, yeah, Bubble's the front end, Xano's the back end. Obviously, that's true. But what exactly does that encompass? Okay, so when it comes to Xano, what we're going to be dealing with Xano, and if we have a look at our Bubble app, and let's go to our data page, this should give you a clue that the data types is completely empty besides the built-in user type. So your data does not live in Bubble at all, okay? So your data types will be empty. Now there are exceptions to this which we'll cover in a little bit, but generally speaking your data types will be empty because your data will live inside of Xano. Now you have no choice but to use the user type, and you will use the user type. However, authentication will be handled again with Xano, because that makes it so much easier to authenticate the API calls that you'll need to make on Xano to get your data back into Bubble. So it's going to be the authentication, auth, it's going to be the database, and also it's going to be your backend workflows. So when you're in Bubble and you want to create a new workflow, you go here and you say backend workflow. That we do not do in Bubble. We will use Xano for that. Okay, so that's the Xano end of it clear. Is it auth, database, API workflows, backend workflows, okay? Everything else, including the design of the application, all of your pages, all of your reusables, all of your workflows that are not to do with backend workflows that run within the browser, what we call client-side workflows, they stay with Bubble. So everything that you're used to, and most people's app development lives in Bubble, so it's all familiar for you as well. Your styles will live in Bubble as well. In terms of this, the option sets will also live in Bubble, because we can use those client side quite easily. Even though they're coming down from the server, they will be downloaded with your actual page, so therefore they can come and you can use those quite happily, just as you would now, let's say for the navigation options, etc. So that is kind of a high level viewpoint of exactly what the delineation of concerns are in terms of back end and front end. Anything to do with pages, anything to do with workflows that run in the client on the browser, anything to do with option sets, we're going to use Bubble just as we did before in exactly the same way. Okay, the only kind of thing that I'm not opinionated about, that is entirely up to you how you want to use, is the file manager, which is in terms of uploading your images or videos or documents or files or whatever it may be. That's entirely up to you how you want to manage that. Now Bubble's file storage is quite expensive, but then again so is Xano's. So if we have a look at Bubble's pricing for this, so on the starter plan, which is your £29 a month, sorry, $29 a month, sorry, I'm English, I think in pounds primarily. So let's have a look here. So your file storage here, okay, is 50 gig as part of your $29 a month, or 32 if you pay monthly. Okay, so 50 gig, that's quite a lot. You get a lot of storage for that, and then if you want to upgrade to the next plan, then you get 100 gig. Okay, so it's not massively expensive. It kind of is, but it isn't. If we have a look at Xano and their pricing, in terms of the free plan, actually I didn't look at what we get for free. we just get 0.5 gig, okay, on the free plan with Bubble. But then again, this is more about once you deploy and you get your users uploading images and stuff. So in Xano, you just get image upload, which are watermark, which is fair enough because you won't use that when you launch. When you launch, you're going to be on the starter plan, which is $59 a month. I think it's $67 if you pay monthly. And on that one, you only get 10 gig of media storage, okay? And then you can go through all these other plans. There's lots of different scale 1 to 8. And what do you get with that? So you only get 50 gig of media storage with Xano, which is what you get with the basic paid plan in Bubble. Let's have a look at the increased plan limits on here. So you can see to get an extra 10 gig, it's $5 a month. So it's quite expensive on Xano. So it's up to you. You just got to kind of weigh it up. Probably another alternative that you might want to use is just set up your own AWS Amazon S3 account, your own Amazon S3 bucket. You get 5 gig of S3 storage for free. If you go to pricing, okay, so the pricing, if you look here, the basic one, the standard, the first 50 terabytes a month, yeah, you're doing well if you go above that, is, look at that, per gigabyte is 0.23 cents per gigabyte. So for 10 gigabyte, above and beyond the basic in the plan, Xano are going to charge you $5. Xano stores it on Google Cloud, not on Amazon AWS, but still, so that's $5. And so basically for like 25, maybe a little bit more, 25 cents a month, you can get 10 gig on there. So let's say the 50. So basically on AWS you can store gigabytes and gigabytes for pennies a month. So if you can, that's probably, it's a little bit more setup, a little bit more playing around, but it's probably going to be worth it actually to go to AWS S3. Depends on what your app is going to do and how many files you're planning to upload. In terms of how you'd get that into Bubble, is you're going to need a plugin for that. One that I've used in the past is this one, Tiny PNG Compress Resize Image S3. So what you can do is compress the files that you upload, which will help it if you do store it in Bubble, and then not alternatively, but as well as, you can optionally upload that to an S3 bucket as well. Now that's entirely up to you. I think this is a paid plugin, but it's only about $8, something like that, so it's nothing really. But at the end of the day, it's entirely up to you which one you want to go. The most easiest and convenient one is obviously Bubble. It's going to let you have 50 gig up front once you're on your pay starter one, which really you need to be on anyway, even when you're not too deep into development, but certainly for when you launch, you get 50 gig out the box, and it's $3 per 100 gigabyte. So you just look at that, right? An extra $3 per 100 gigabyte. Look at what Xano were charging you, $5 per 10 gigabyte. So actually, even though AWS is by far and away the cheapest, it's still not fortunes to just stick with Bubble's file storage. Right, so I've actually found something in Bubble that's quite cheap and predictable. So there you go. So yeah, probably stick with that if you want, and maybe as well pair it with the Tiny PNG plugin so that it compresses the file size before it gets uploaded to Bubble storage, or use S3. I'm not opinionated about it. It's entirely up to you. It's not an issue for me with my app, but it's entirely up to you which way you want to do it. Okay, so I just wanted to cover those things just to give you some idea. Okay, so let's move on to how it's going to work by connecting Bubble to Xano. Now, previously we had to go through the API connector to get into Xano, to get Xano data down into Bubble. The trouble with that is that the API connector is all wrapped up in Bubble's workflow unit calculation. Okay, so you're back to that situation. I explained in that previous video how it's a real source of contention for me that Bubble get in the middle of that to charge you for something that it really has no need to get in the middle of, but it does. So there you go. So the way around that is to not use the API connector and to use Jared Gibb and Eli Beach's plugin called the Xano connector. And this doesn't go through Bubble's API connector. It does its own thing by accessing Xano's client libraries directly, and that way completely bypassing Bubble's API connector and Bubble's Woo workflow unit calculation system. So effectively your back end, with the exception of files, if you want to keep your files in Bubble, it keeps them out of the workload unit unpredictability costings. So you're entirely then in the hands of keeping your data with Xano. And by the way, I've just gone through that Xano was expensive for the file upload. It's not particularly expensive for the database, and that's really what's key here. Xano isn't cheap, but it's accessible, and it is a really good way to host your data. And just to give you some other benefits, by the way, with this one, and this is the key one for me, and should be for anybody really, particularly if you're outside the United States, is as you're building, you've got to store your data on a shared cluster in the United States. But once you launch it and you start paying, then you've got a good choice of where you can host your data. Okay, so if you're in the EU, you can host it in Germany. I would host it in the UK here, but you've got Australia, Brazil, Canada, many different options where you can host your data, which is more local to you or local to your customers. And to do that on Bubble, you've got to have a dedicated plan. In fact, let's have a look at that. If I go back here, right, we're going to have to look at the comparison again. So let's have a look at this. It is mentioned somewhere. There you go. Where is it? Choice of hosting region. Okay, none of these plans give you that option. All of it's stored on a shared server on the west coast of America, or a shared cluster of servers. And you've got to be on a custom plan, which is what they call dedicated plan, which means that you get your own dedicated instance of Bubble running for you. And I've never inquired about it, but from the information that I've seen, it's about $3,500 to $4,000 per month to be on a dedicated plan, which is the only way that you can have a choice of hosting region presently. That's how things are at the moment, and they have been since I began using Bubble. There's talk of them changing it. They certainly haven't done it yet, so there's no reason to think that will happen anytime soon. With Xano, you can host your data much closer to home. Ideally they'd have more options, but from a purely selfish point of view, I don't care. I can host mine here. Literally, I live less than 300 miles away from London. My clients are all in the UK or Ireland, majority of them anyway. I'd love to go global. So I'm quite happy with that. That serves my purpose. Okay, I can't get that with Bubble at all. So that's kind of enough on the pricing thing there. So as I say, let's just go back and go through the Xano connector. Okay, because this is how you're going to get at your data. This is how you're going to get at your authentication, calling API workflows, and how you're going to get your data back from Xano's database. And let's just look at a couple of downsides to using Xano as opposed to using Bubble's backend, Bubble's database here, because nothing's perfect. There are a couple of things that people kind of have a bit of a nick about, and one of those is real-time updates. And Bubble's database does this natively. You don't have to think about it. It's out of the box. It's in there. So if you've only ever worked with Bubble and only ever worked with Bubble's database, okay, this may seem like a real off-putting thing, but it shouldn't be, and I'll explain why. Okay, is that Xano doesn't support a technology what we call WebSockets, and that presently, at the time of recording, they don't support it. I'm pretty sure they will in the future. And what WebSockets does is it creates a connection between the front end and the back end on like a pipe basis. Okay, so it's like a permanent pipe while you're in that session between the client and the server. And whenever there's updates to the database on the server, those updates are pushed to the client, which is why whenever in Bubble you add a record or another user adds a record, every other user gets it on the screen. Okay, the way that things work with API is that the client expressly calls the server, the API on the server, and then the server delivers that data down one time, and that's it, it's finished. That transaction is complete. There's no kind of create me situation where I've asked for the data, now keep giving it me every single time. That's WebSockets. That's not how APIs work. So you can do things like polling, let's say every 10 seconds, where you can run the API call every 10 seconds and get that data back. That's a traditional way, the way that a server and a front end communicate. Okay, WebSockets is a technology which enables you to have that permanent, when I say permanent I mean during that user session, between the client and the server, so that the server can deliver the data back, okay, without the client requesting it. But as you can imagine, that's pretty expensive to run. Okay, and Bubble does it on everything. It doesn't even give you the choice about whether you want to do that or not. You know, it doesn't sort of say, okay, let me switch it on and off. So I can have it on for chat, I can have it on for real-time dashboards, but you know what, my list of customers, I don't care really. It doesn't give you that choice, and now they're going to charge you for that because it is expensive from their point of view to have that WebSocket running for every single data type that you've got in your system. Okay, but by giving it to you out of the box and making you think that it's kind of standard, they've kind of coddled you a little bit because it's not standard. It's not the way that things are generally done. Things are generally done through an API call, okay, and you use WebSockets where it's absolutely needed, where that kind of data connection and that real-time updates is really required. And like I say, now they're going to charge you for it. Okay, so you have to think slightly differently in terms of how Xano is going to work, but again, we're going to work through this Xano connector. And if you have a look at what Xano connector does, we have things like refresh data from a Xano query, refresh data from a Xano get. So you don't need to set everything up. You can tell it to go and refresh the data whenever you need it. Okay, so that works really well. So you can see that as a downside, you can see it as a positive because you get a choice. Well, actually you don't get a choice either way. It'd be nice to have a choice on both ends. On Xano it'd be lovely to have WebSockets where you need it, or on Bubble it'd be great to just say turn real-time updates. But anyway, you kind of have all or nothing on both ends. Okay, with Bubble, real-time updates whether you like it or not. Xano, just API calls and responses whether you like it or not as well. Okay, so the other thing that's unusual that compared to working with Bubble database is that everything has to work through this Xano connector. So you can't just drop a repeating group on the page and say do a search for, because that do a search for is specifically for Bubble's database. Okay, now what you have to do is to go through the Xano connector, and Eli and Jared have made it as convenient as they possibly can, but still it does work differently. And one of the things that you have to do, because if you imagine you've got your data types, let's say a customer data type in Xano, and you need to get that down into Bubble. Okay, now Bubble has no idea about the data types that are in Xano. Absolutely can't deal with them. It doesn't know what is the data source that I need to read from. It has no clue what is the customer in Xano. So you kind of have to manually kind of train it to know what a data type is and to match that up with the data coming down from Xano. And it's not difficult, it's just different and maybe a little bit less convenient. And the way that you have to do that is you have to go through the API connector to do it, even though you're never actually going to use it in your application. You have to do it to set up the data types. So for example here, I've got a data type called leads, customers, products, for example. And what essentially happens is that I run that once. So I set the API up in Xano, and then I run that through Bubble once. It picks up the data type, it knows where the data is coming from, and then I can then use that just as I would a standard data type in Bubble. Okay, so it's just something that you've got to set up. So when you need to set up a new data type, you've got to go to Xano, set that up in Xano, and then you've got to set that up in an API, which Xano automates a lot of that for you as well. And then we need to come in here just to create that through. So once you get used to it, it's just a bog standard step of application development. It's just different to how you would work with Bubble in that regard. And the other thing as well is that whenever you make a change to a data type, let's say you change the name of a field, or you add a new field, or you delete a field, whatever it is, what you have to do is make that change in Xano and then come in here and then run it through Bubble again, so that Bubble adjusts its data type to reflect that change. So there's just an extra step in the middle compared to what you're actually used to. Okay, so that kind of explains the concepts of what we're going to do with the Zabble stack. And in the next one, we'll start to implement the first step of all this, which is auth. Okay, so listen, I think that's explained the core concepts, where the divide is, where the delineation of concerns are. So what's the front end, what's the back end, what does Bubble do, what does Xano do? I hope that covers that for you, and so we can get into the next step, which is to implement the auth, the authentication with Xano, which is the starting point of any app. So listen, thanks for watching, thanks for sticking with me. I hope this is interesting for you. Please leave some comments, please like, and whatever you want to do, subscribe, and just let me know that this is content that you're enjoying and that you like and that you want to see more of. Give me some encouragement. Have a good one. Take it easy.